Welcome everybody to this event. My name is Rob Page. I'm the founder of Common Press, publishing house based in Manchester, which specialises in short fiction. Tonight we're here to launch this fantastic, fascinating anthology, Collision Stories from the Science at CERN. I thought I'd introduce tonight's speakers first, before we talk more about the project itself. Rob Appleby is a professor of physics, specialising in particle physics at the University of Manchester, and a member of the Prof Institute for Accelerated Science and Engineering. He's worked for many years on particle colliders, particle accelerators, and the use of them in cancer treatment and also public engagement. He has a PhD in particle physics from Manchester University, and also he's been involved in this project of Commons for many years. Lucy Caldwell is Belfast-born, award-winning author of 3 novels most recently these days, 2 collections of short stories, Multitudes and Intimacies, and several plays for radio and stage. She's the editor of Being Various, New Irish Short Stories, and her many awards include, but are not limited to, the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, the George Devine Award, the Dylan Thomas Prize, and the BBC National Short Story Award. Steven Moffat needs very little introduction. He is a television writer, producer, executive producer and screenwriter. He's best known, of course, for his work as the showrunner, writer and executive producer of BBC's iconic Doctor Who series and the equally iconic Sherlock series based on the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. His other credits include Press Gang, which he wrote when he was still a nipper, still a teenager, Coupling, Jekyll, Dracula, and most recently he premiered a play in Chichester Festival Theatre, the Unfriend, last year. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much again for being involved in this project. I thought I'd start with Rob, who's the co-editor of the book with Connie Potter, to just say a few words about how this project sort of came together and how it works.
Yeah, happy to. Hi everyone. So here's the book. It's in the bookshop as well, you'll just buy the copy. It's all about storytelling. So it's about storytelling in science fiction, so we created some new science fiction. It's also about storytelling of the science of CERN, where there's lots of cool science going on right now. And creating new fiction was a way to tell that story to a new audience, to communicate what we're doing at CERN and what we're trying to find out in a new way, which might, I hope, reach some new audiences. Somebody who maybe was reluctant to pick up a book about dark matter, or maybe a popular science book, but who might read a story. And they say, okay, I really enjoyed the story, but also I now know a little bit more about what dark matter is than I did before. And that's, for me as a scientist, is the goal, is telling everybody who's interested what they're doing and what's going on. So the process was interesting. So we worked with Common Press, and Ra and I had a chat, and we thought, with all the cool science going on, we should bring an equal partnership of scientists and writers together. So we put a call out to the scientific community of Europe. We said, look, we want to write some cool new sci-fi. We want you to work with authors. What ideas do you have you think would make a really, really good story? So we asked everybody, and we had a huge response from all the scientists and engineers in Europe. And we took these paragraphs of their idea. We got rid of some of them, to be fair. We had a bit of a triage of places. Some of the ideas were a little bit wacky, but what we wanted to do was represent the science of CERN in a realistic way. So we want no black holes destroying the universe on day one of the Large Hadron Collider. That's not good PR, it's also not true. So we thought we'd sort of go through and make an edited list. And then we paired up the scientists and engineers with authors, like a dating agency. So we got people together, and these are the 2 authors that we got involved in this project. And then what's interesting about this particular project was that the scientist and the writer, they were equal, they worked together, so they had lots of discussions between the writers and the scientists about the science, and also I think in many cases about the process of writing, because I think scientists are quite curious people, so to work with an author of this caliber was a great experience for the scientists as well. And we flew all our authors to CERN, or most of our authors to CERN, give them the VIP tour of all the exciting experiments. And they worked together, and they wrote all the stories that we have in the book now. And after every story by the author, we have a piece by the scientist, written from the first person, explaining from the scientist's point of view the science that we have in the story. So you get but you have the story, you see the science, and you have the scientist's perspective as well. And what we have, I think, is pretty unique in the sense that we have the stories and the science sitting equally side by side, and that's why it's so special.
Thank you. CERN is this monument to not just to science, but also to international collaboration and cooperation, and it holds an iconic sort of position really in everyone's imagination that's interested in this area of science. What was your first impressions of it? What were your preconceptions of it, Lucy and Steven, before you went there? And what were your first impressions when you got there? Steve?
Well, I didn't go on that trip. I'd already been there. I was lucky enough to go when they had shut it down, which means you could go downstairs and visit the big thing because they were cleaning it or something. And so we actually saw the big wheel part and all that. They didn't turn it on, which was lucky because it started to black out. It's an astounding place. There are many astounding things about CERN. That was incredible. There was a building among the complex which is called, unironically, absolutely truthfully, absolutely accurately, it is called the Antimatter Factory. You're laughing, I'm not kidding. It says it over the door, right? It's the Antimatter Factory, and do you know what they do there? Well, they make antimatter. They're worried. A guy told me this who was working there, and he seemed, well, he didn't seem sane, but he seemed very, very excitable. And he said, we're quite troubled about making antimatter because we don't know how to store it. It might fall up. Well, thanks, mate. I also, I think in that same building, saw a guy going around putting cables out and labeling and putting them back in. And I said, what's he doing? Is he going to end the universe with that? And he said, well, actually, when we first plugged it all up, we forgot to label all the cables. We've been doing this for about 50 years. It's exactly like under your desks.
I cover everything in tinfoil. Which you're not allowed to do.
One of the things you do when you're the showrunner Doctor Who is you go to the design part and you say, no tinfoil. It looks shit. You don't have any tinfoil. Never. And then you go into the real thing. Covered in bloody tinfoil. No, on the first day. But that was my experience. But you went as part of the whole team.
And we also got to go, 89 metres underground.
Yes.
Very large to the thing.
Yeah.
To the thing.
To the thing. The place where the magic happens.
The place of ancient eagle.
I think, Rad, when you first sent the email saying, was I interested in being one of the writers in this project, I think I answered within about a nanosecond.
You just won an award, and I didn't expect to get any reply at the time because you had so much attention on you. But you got back straight away.
The idea, the opportunity to go to CERN and to talk to scientists there, it was the commission of a lifetime. And what fascinates me always is my kind of sweet spot is where 60s mysticism crosses over with cutting edge practical physics. What I love is when, say, science proves something that we already know. Like in epigenetics, they prove that if someone lives through a famine, that can affect their DNA up to 7 generations, all those sort of things. And so I was so interested to talk to scientists there. The stories that we have in Irish mythology about Tirnanoe, you go to a mysterious land and you spend a whole lifetime there and you come back and not a second has passed, or you go for an afternoon and 300 years have passed. We get these stories everywhere, Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I was so interested to talk to scientists about what might, time as a force is weak when gravity is strong. So it may well be that there are places in the Earth where if gravity is strong for whatever reason, you can slip through the bounds of time and go into another realm. And we have these stories, every civilization in the world has these stories. And so I'm always so interested to talk to scientists and say, what might this be saying? Or what might be an explanation for this? How far have we come toward understanding it?
Okay. Should we have the reading?
No.
This is Stephen's favourite part. So get ready, it's going to be about an hour.
We've locked the door.
Am I going first?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Now, it may occur to you to wonder why, with my chiseled good looks and glowering sexual charisma, I do not perform my own material. You will not, after tonight, wonder that again. If I make mistakes, don't snigger, okay? It's not clever about that. I'm doing it off my iPhone because you can make it print better. Going dark by Steven Moffat. By the time you read this, I will have ceased to exist. I'm being precise. I'm not talking about dying. I don't mean someone will have pushed me off a building or under a train or squashed my head with a well-chosen rock or any of the kind of things that might naturally happen to a person in my line of work. I mean that as you read these words, there will be no trace of me in the world. I won't have just stopped living. I will never have started living in the first place. I won't just stop existing. I will never have existed at all. These words, if they still cling to this page, as I hope somehow they can, will have been written by someone else. If you mention my name to the people who used to be my parents, they won't know who you're talking about. If you visit the woman who divorced me 4 years ago, she will look blank when you ask about me. If you decide to be thorough and go to my old school, there will be no record of my attendance. No one there will have any recollection of me. The place where I carved my name under our low bench in the first floor boys' cloakroom will be unmarked. Or perhaps another name will be there. Maybe the name of the child my parents had instead of me. This is not a trick. This isn't some sinister conspiracy to erase the facts of my existence. This is the actual erasure of every moment of my life from the physical world. I know how this sounds, but take me seriously. By the time you finish reading this, you might never have existed either. I could tell you a little of my background, but it seems pointless now none of it really happened. So let's just say, I'm someone in a line of work you would barely understand and would certainly not meet with your approval. When people ask me what I do, I'm used to shrugging and saying, I'm a sort of troubleshooter. I have perfected a brief smile and a glance at my feet that reliably ends the conversation. Now and then, people persist. Once, a slightly drunk woman called Evie asked if troubleshooting involved any actual shooting. For some reason, perhaps boredom, I told her the truth. Yes. She was excited when she asked the question, but something in my tone when I answered made her frown. I glanced at my feet to end the conversation, and when I looked up again, she was gone. Not gone in the sense I am now gone, just walking away a little too unsteadily and a little too rapidly. From the set of her shoulders, she was clearly still frowning. I mention Evie because it was in that moment, as I watched her weaving among the other party guests, that I first laid eyes on the chimp woman. I'm going to be as exact as I can now. You have a particular responsibility when you write about people who no longer exist and events that never happened. Because your words are all that is left of them, the only trace remaining anywhere in the real world. This is the testimony of the never were. For a little more on the ticket, you get critical pounding.
Thank you, Stephen. So that story is based on a theory that was posited at the time that perhaps CERN, nature was trying to stop CERN from finding the Higgs boson. There had been a number of problems with CERN around about 2007, 2008. Lots of very unlikely things kept going wrong, from magnets exploding, setting the project back to 2 or 3 years, to members of the physics research team being arrested for being members of Al Qaeda. It's very strange things happened, and there was an argument at the time, or there was a theory that perhaps nature was reaching back in time and was trying to prevent things from being found, or perhaps nature had this ability to reach back and delete history. Do you want to explain the science behind this? Because it sounds crazy.
I'll try. So I'll try and set some context first. So in science, we like to build theories about the universe. It's perfectly possible to build a scientific theory about the universe that is totally mathematically correct, but it's just simply not true in our universe. And we love to do that, and just in case one of these things comes along and is out our universe. You also can build more useful theories which are true in our universe, like quantum mechanics or relativity or something like this, which we know are true in our universe. But then what you like to do is explore the consequences of them. And those consequences can take you to some pretty interesting places. So, for example, oxygen molecules in this room are bouncing around all the time. You can calculate the probability that they all go over into that far corner and we all instantly die. Right? You can calculate it. It's a number. It's a very, very small number. It's interesting to know you can do that, but it has no practical consequence, even though it's true, because it's a very, very small probability. You have to have many, many universes all coming through for that particular configuration of oxygen molecules to do that. But it's possible. So this particular paper was taken in that spirit. It was exploring the consequences of what is possible. And it's a perfectly reasonable argument. Because we know that the universe is probabilistic. Quantum mechanics, which is one of our theories in the universe we think is a pretty good description of what goes on with extraneutron particles, is probabilistic. And everything it calculates and predicts is based on exploring all possible things that can happen, assign a probability to each of them, and then see what actually happens in our universe. So, therefore, it's possible to have a universe. So, this means that unlikely things, in principle, maybe could happen, but also it means that if something is unlikely to happen, and doesn't in a particular universe, and you start to actively look forward in that direction, it's possible, but unlikely, that the universe would start making other things happen to stop that final thing happening, because it's so unlikely it will happen and won't happen in our universe. It's called reverse causality. So, if the universe decides, and that's a bit I have objection to, I don't think the universe decides, I think it's an interpretation of quantum mechanics. That if the universe decides, let's go with that, that we don't find the Higgs boson, then it will start to make improbable things happen so that we don't find the Higgs boson. So, for example, in 2008, we turned on the Large Hadron Collider, we had a problem, we had an accident. There was a release of liquid helium, destroyed about 100 meters of the accelerator, who was set back for 2 years. So that could have been, according to this interpretation of our theories of probability, an attempt by the universe to stop us finding the Higgs boson. And that's the essence of the paper that we're talking about. And in Steven's story, it's not the Higgs boson, it's dark matter. And in the story, there's proponents trying to find dark matter. The universe wishes them not to do so starts to erase them from history to make sure they don't find dark matter. And that's an exploration of this particular interesting paper that was published in 2006.
So the two scientists, Nielsen and Ninomiya, have suggested an idea of a way of testing whether the universe wanted us not to find the Higgs boson, and that was to create a card game in which there were an infinite number of spades and one heart. And if you drew the heart, then the agreement would be, if you got a spade, then they would carry on with their research and carry on building CERN. But if you drew the one in a gazillion heart, then the universe really, really was trying to tell us not to.
You would not need that was spent on the Large Hadron Collider. That'd be a very awkward conversation without a CERN manager. I don't know if that actually happened, whether anyone actually played that game, drunk otherwise, in the CERN.
Thank you. So, Lucy, I'm going to move on to your story. Your story is also about dark matter. Do you want to say a few words and read the passage?
Yeah, my story is very different. I'm a great lover of sci-fi. I love, especially if I'm going on a journey and I need something to sustain me through, midnight coaches and cancelled budget airlines, flights, whatever it is. And I love like Adrian Tchaikovsky or Assassin Leo or Ursula Le Guin's big world-building books. I've never written anything like that, and so I thought maybe I will. Maybe I'll go to CERN and I'll write, a wildly imaginative sci-fi story. And I was working with a scientist called Dr. Joe Haley, who was also working in dark matter and had this idea about dark matter beings trying to contact us. There was a really interesting idea, and I would love to read your version of that story. You can do that story. But as I was at CERN and speaking to the scientists, actually the thing that struck me most was we'd had the amazing tours and we'd seen these scientists and we'd listened to some of them say how they spent 30 years, their whole career trying to prove something. And if it turns out to be the way that they hope, that'll be a Nobel Prize. And if it doesn't, they're discarded, but their work they've still put in the same work. And we were in Connie's office, Connie Potter, who's your co-editor, at the end of a long day, and she produced a bottle of gin, and someone ran down to the vending machine to get cans of peach juice. And one of the scientists who'd been giving a tour suddenly said, I was still quizzing him on dark matter, I just hadn't found an entry right into my story, and he said, you know what, I think it'll all turn out to be meaningless. And he said, I think that we're just looking in the wrong place and we're not seeing something very, that will seem very apparent. And he said, I think that all the work that we're putting in, trying to find out why dark matter doesn't interact, we need dark matter for theories to make sense, but there's something we're not seeing, there's something very fundamental we're missing. And he said, all of my life has been, in the pursuit of this particular understanding. And I started thinking about what that would be like. And another scientist that I met at CERN was telling me about John Stuart Bell, who was a Belfast-born physician. He was part of physicists. He was from a family of very, they didn't have very much money. None of the family got to go to for education first in 14. His sister won a scholarship actually to go to grammar school, but the father didn't see the point in educating a girl, so he wouldn't let her go. John Stuart Bell was very bright, and he, at 16, got a job as a lab technician to put himself through university. He earned himself 2 degrees, and he went on to disprove part of Einstein's theory. And so these two things kind of came together. And so my story is about someone who has spent his whole life in this quest. And the story starts when he comes back to Belfast because his mother is dying, and he's starting to feel like his life is meaningless anyway. I'll read 2 different paragraphs from it. He's here with his sister and 13-year-old nephew. You should make the most of him, Tanya says to Finley. He could help you with your science homework. Sure, I'm dropping it as soon as I can, says Finley. Even so, says Tanya. She turns to him. Why don't you tell our Finn something cool, she says, like an experiment or something. See if you can fire him up. Okay, he says. Let me think. He lifts a Take a Break magazine and balances it on 2 tea mugs. Come here, says to Finley. Stand here, so you're only looking at this from above. You're not allowed to move it or in any way touch it. So if I put an object underneath, how can you tell what that object is? Sure, I can see it with your wallet, Finley says. Pretend that you can't. What's the solution? Don't know, says Finley. X-ray vision? Nope. Going back in time? Nope. Is the answer that you're supposed to bend down and have a wee jick underneath, says his mum. Change your perspective. No, Mum. See, what you do is, if I had some marbles, I could fire them underneath and plot the angle and speed they bounced off whatever was hidden below. If I did that enough times, collected enough data, I'd have a fair idea of the shape and mass of a hidden object. Oh, right, says Finley. That's basically particle physics in a nutshell, he says. Well, says his mum, isn't that just fascinating? And this is a different paragraph. He thinks of his dad on the day he left for CERN, clapping him on the shoulder and saying, don't go making any black holes by accident. And him thinking, this entire place is a black hole. This life is a black hole. But he didn't say it because it didn't matter. He was going, in his mind's eye, faster than the observable speed of light already gone, so far beyond this now, to the possibility of things making sense. He used to think, he thinks, that dark matter would be the gateway to another universe. He used to think that we couldn't perceive it simply because our senses were too limited, because we'd only learned to exist in 3 dimensions, 4 at most, out of 9, 11, 20. He used to think that one day within our lifetimes, we'd find a way through to whatever adventures might be waiting on the other side. If we didn't, we were doomed. In 5 billion years, a slow blink on the face of deep time, the sun would swell to its red giant phase, engulfing the entire orbit of Mercury, likely Venus too, leaving the Earth a scorched and barren chunk of rock which would spin and spin on before eventually shedding every last one of its atoms in the churning depths of its one solar system. He used to think that maybe dark matter was something, somewhere, trying to contact us, trying to tell us how to escape from this, trying to show us how to see and what to do and how to be, if only we could know it.
Lucy. Rob, I'm really interested by this idea that dark matter could be everything. It could be this incredibly complex, invisible world, which is just as complex as our world that sits alongside us, or it could be nothing. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
I'll try. So, what you need to understand is if you ever come across a physicist who's arrogant and thinks they know the answers, do not trust them. Do not trust them. The reason is we know very little about our universe, and it's a very complicated thing. We've done a lot of advancement in certain areas, but there's a lot of big cosmological puzzles that we're still nowhere near understanding. So if we take the universe and we weigh it, we can weigh it by doing cosmological fitting to various data we can collect, right? Doesn't matter. And we found out that a mere 5% of the universe is the stuff all around us, and also the stuff that we know about. So all these fantastical particles we make in the Large Hadron Collider, everything is only 5% of the universe. And that's the bit we know loads about. We've spent hundreds of years exploring, a mere 5%. The rest, 95%, we know a lot less about, despite what some people may say in popular science. So 25% of that unknown part is dark matter. So dark matter, we know it's there, but we can't see it. And we know it's there because it interacts by only one force of nature, that is gravity, which is the weakest force by a long way. So we definitely know it's there. We see it in rotating galaxies, we see it through something called gravitational lensing, which is a consequence of Einstein's relativity. So it's definitely there, and we can figure out how much the universe is made of dark matter. What we don't know is what particle it is. We don't know how they interact with each of these particles of dark matter. And this is a huge mystery. I had an interview a few weeks ago on a different topic in a Bio-American magazine, and they asked me, do you think in our lifetime we'll understand dark matter? And dark energy, which I'll come to in a second. I think dark matter we will in our lifetime understand what dark matter is. It's the particles that are around us all now that we just can't see or perceive because it only interacts gravitationally. But I think we'll figure it out in the next few decades. The other bit of the universe, the bulk of the universe, is called dark energy. And we have literally no idea what this is. Literally none, despite what you read in some popular science places. And that's a mystery that we never solve in any of our lifetimes. So pessimistic.
Yeah, this is the cause, the reason why the universe is not just expanding, it's accelerating in its expansion.
This is weird force.
We're heading towards the heat death of the universe, which is a very depressing end to any story.
This is weird force that pushes galaxies apart.
Dark energy.
Dark energy,
Back to the end, guys.
Dark energy is a weird force that pushes galaxies apart. And the faster they're moving apart, the more they get pushed apart, which goes against every existing understanding of the universe.
Yeah, pretty depressing. So, going back to the stories, Steven and Lucy, how important is it for you when writing your fictions, your various fictions, to get the kind of non-fiction bit right? Why is research important? Because science fiction, the science bit doesn't always have to be right, for instance.
No, it doesn't. And people know that stories are stories. I mean, what you want is something that feels authentic at a particular level. But stories, you never mind science fiction. If you have a conversation between two people in a kitchen on television, it's usually over very, very quickly, isn't it? Someone says, I just want to come around and tell you a bad piece of news. What, Pete's dead? My God, that's terrible. Yes, I'm off now. That's it. Right? No one has ever visited your house for so short a time. Someone storms out the room, you know that bit? Come back again. They don't just walk after them. I mean, they're just over there. Fiction operates in an entirely different way, but is decorated superficially to look like real life and indicates truths about real life in different ways. But it is not operating by the same rule book, whether that's the science rule book that Rob understands, or just a robot that everyone understands. I often think about how different dialogue in real life is from the dialogue we write. It doesn't resemble, it's, we just wander around the subject like I'm doing now. It's a tremendous load of faff. And then you sort of refine it, and people exchange free witticism, which if anyone had ever said spontaneously, they'd be talking about it for the rest of the conversation. So fiction is different from real life, and science fiction, as I'm sure Rob is about to point out, boring old dad, is frequently fantastic. Obviously, have a universe melting people out of existence, and I detected a certain skepticism from the author about whether that would actually happen. How would you know, Rob? You might have had air when you came in. The universe was against it.
I was thinking of what Garcia Marquez says about how in journalism, one erroneous fact is enough to topple the whole edifice. But in fiction, all you need is one plausible detail, one unlikely plausible detail for the reader to believe the whole thing. And so I think that with the science, I did want to get the science right. It didn't matter that it was faithful. I didn't write my story before going to CERN because I didn't want to Schrodinger's cat. I didn't want to preempt what I was going to discover there. And so when I was in CERN, sometimes it does feel, what I love most about fiction is the excuse it gives you to be in the world. In no other capacity would I have been able to be at CERN and be there and be asking these people these questions. And that's what I love about a writer. You get to go to these places and you get such intimate access to people and what they're thinking or what they're feeling. And so for me, I was trying to capture a certain fidelity. It wasn't necessarily just the facts, it was a fidelity of atmosphere or a fidelity of what the people were feeling, what they were doing. A lot of scientists are religious, and I was asking Joe Haley, who I was working with, I was saying to Joe, are you superstitious? And he said no. He said, in fact, I'm anti-superstitious. He said, it used to be that if my favourite baseball team was playing, I wouldn't wear their shirt, because wearing their shirt would have been superstitious. And then I realised not wearing their shirt was superstitious, so I devised a system so that sometimes I'd wear their shirt, sometimes I'd and it's like, when I was doing research, it's like, that's what I'm looking for, more than an accurate explanation of one of the theorems, which, Rob has asked me not to ask him to explain Bell's theorem, because he will either not be able to or be here for the rest of the hour.
It's the latter, by the way.
So Rob, Bell's theorem. but paradoxically, science fiction is often what gets scientists into science at the start of their career. They're inspired by Doctor Who or Star Trek, and although it doesn't play by the rules, it kind of has that authenticity which fires the imagination of young readers and young viewers.
I think no scientist cares if science fiction doesn't obey the laws of science. It's fiction, right? It has its vehicle, it can have its imagination that goes beyond science to create a fascinating story. I think it's the non-scientists sometimes that get more upset about the violation of physical science in science fiction than the scientists. It's a curious phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Scientists, I often chat to Brian Cox and I see him at things and she's doctor, I say, how wrong are we this time? And he's got no problem with any of that. No scientist does, because scientists aren't people who started out like science fiction writers thinking, what if? They are people who exercise their imagination and consider impossibilities. The reason I was attracted to the idea that I wrote about was that some scientists did sit there and think, well, let's just work that idea through. So scientists never objected, in my time, to Doctor Who, ever. But you might get a policeman informing you, to your great astonishment, that there were elements in Sherlock Holmes' detective style that were completely effective. It's murdered by dog, it's hanging in the basketballs. We know it's not real. Oh, but it wouldn't happen that way. You're kidding, wouldn't it? But no, scientists are not at all like that. They ham along to it.
Well, there's commonality. So both are very imaginative, scientists and writers.
Yeah.
You know, writers are very imaginative, they explore some new made-up universe. Scientists are also very imaginative, but when they're doing science, we have imagination that's constrained by the physical laws of the universe. We can be imaginative inside that framework, which is a different kind of imagination. So when we're reading fiction or some sci-fi, it's great to have either kind of imagination. But if we're at work with our white coats on doing our CERN science, we think and explore consequences, but constrained by what we know about the universe.
One of the things that both of your stories are drawn to, Lucy and Steven, is this idea of the scientist as somebody who's on a quest, who's on a mission. In your story, Steven, characters lose their lives, lose their histories, lose their very existence because they've been looking for something. And in your story, Lucy, again, this character could have, in a way, wasted his life in the pursuit of something that he'll never find. What is it about that kind of lifelong determination, that devotion to something that's quite, abstract, that drew you to those characters in that kind of process?
Well, funnily, for the last at least a decade or so, I've been researching the lives of young women, especially becoming nuns, and becoming, choosing a sort of very austere religious vocation, choosing the cloistered life, choosing, not where you can wear your normal clothes and work in community, but with a real austere, devotion. And there was something that was funny being there at CERN. There was something of that. There's something monastic in the room. And of course, people live in flats and come in, but when you're actually at CERN, in the rooms that people are living in when they're there, the air is very pure. You're up in the Swiss mountains, and the air is pure, and the rooms are like monastic cells. And there is this sense of single-mindedness and of devotion, and of this sense that this is your life. You go further and further down one defined path. And I'm a bit envious of that, I think, because I've never had that sort of certainty. I'm much more of a butterfly in my interest. But I think there was definitely something that I wasn't expecting to recognise that I very much felt when I was there.
I think that's a fundamental level also. A story starts with somebody wanting something. You literally can't start a story unless they do. If nobody wants something on the first page, you're just going to stay on the first page. Nothing's going to happen. The interesting thing actually in Lucy's story, to stray off mine, because I think your story is much more about it. The scientific method is almost a way to circumvent the way people are, isn't it? You have a hypothesis. You must test the hypothesis. You can't have a theory and go window shopping for something that fits it, which is the human. We all do that. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when scientists may adhere to the scientific method, but they're still people. So the guy who's got the wrong theory is as crushed as the guy who doesn't get his book published. It's still an expression of ego. It's something that you want. You're not just saying, I'm so glad they got that Higgs boson. I'm glad that my great theory, the giant talking marble, didn't turn out to be.
There's also something that you get it in Brian Moore novels where there's a priest who for 30 years has not believed and yet goes through the motions in the hope that faith will somehow come back. I think there's something of that. It was funny, it took you once. I had a Zoom, my first Zoom that I had with Joe Haney. It lasted about 2.5 hours, and my brain ached from trying to keep up. And then he said, Lucy, before we go, I've done some research into storytelling, and apparently you need an inciting incident and then some rival action. Joe Science, I think you've done this.
What's like? Tell the records, come on.
But there is this, you talk about the kind of the human, passionate, emotional side to this process. There is a story, a myth, I think it's maybe possibly true, of a CERN scientist who got so angry about a rival physicist's publication, he took it and he went and urinated on the paper. It appeared in a...
And could you roll?
You have extenuated circumstances. And too much wine.
So, I think finally, before we move to questions from the audience, CERN is this fantastic, as I say, this fantastic edifice, this monument to international cooperation, scientific investment. There's 23 different countries, member countries, that are pouring millions, literally millions, into it every year. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of universities around the world. It's not just the 23 countries that are involved. It's a phenomenal thing to see, not just because of the science, but because of this degree of cooperation. But it was born out of post-war Europe. It was born out of this wish to kind of rebuild Europe around a non-military scientific research. And it's obviously born out of a very different age to the age that we're in at the moment. And there's a possibility that CERN will, it's carrying on doing fantastic research, but there will be a point where it needs to expand. And there are plans afoot already for what's called the FCC, the Future Circular Collider, which may not be built till 2070 or something like that. And it will be several times orders of magnitude bigger. It will go under the Lake of Geneva. It will have to be absolutely massive. And the level of investment needed for that is going to be astronomical again. Do you worry that we're not in the same sort of geopolitical context that we were that built CERN in the first place, and that we won't have the kind of atmosphere of cooperation going forward? And do you worry about what might happen to particle physics if a project like that sort of stalls?
No. I should probably expand my answer. So, as you say, CERN was founded after the war to rebuild European science, but it's also this great example of international cooperation. You want to do something, build a large particle accelerator that no one country can do by themselves. So that collaboration spirit is as strong now as it ever was. The funding is as strong now as it ever was. But there may be a need to move away scientifically, which will help us from a funding point of view, from large super colliders. So we built the Large Hadron Collider, which is a 27-kilometre underground proton-proton collider, to find the Higgs boson. But we did, and now we're exploring possible candidates of what dark matter is. But we kind of knew with the Large Hadron Collider we would find the Higgs boson or something similar to it. We knew that from the theoretical constraints of our models and other data that we have. What's happening now is we now have lots of other mysteries. Antimatter, what's called CP violation, the origin of the universe, or dark matter, dark energy. And there may be a need to move away from big particle accelerators. So the thing we talked about, the Future Circular Collider, is what we would build to replace the Large Hadron Collider, if that was the right direction to go in, building huge machines. And it would be 100 kilometres. It's still at CERN, going under Lake Geneva, and it would be a huge undertaking, huge. We'd only do that if scientifically it was the right thing to do, and we could afford it. What's happening now is that there's a shift in science towards smaller experiments. So, for example, labs all around the world can take particle beams and smash them onto fixed targets. We don't need a huge accelerator to probe some of this physics. You can do it in lots of different ways. And almost like the huge cost of these beasts means you have to be more creative, because you can't just suddenly throw money at the problem, build a 100-kilometre super LHC and see what you find. You have to be better than that. You have to be more creative. So it's forcing us to be more creative and find interesting experiments. For example, I'll give you an example. There's a possibility we can shine light through a wall, which would explore hidden sector particles. It's just an interesting theory. And actually that involves using lasers and walls and superconducting cavities, which fits in a room. We can explore the final content of the universe, not in a huge accelerator, but in your room, in your bedroom if you want to. So that's kind of where we're headed. And we're at a crossroads for particle physics because we don't quite know where we're going to head, and we just refreshed the global strategy of particle physics, and it was inconclusive what we're going to do next. So we're going to do what we're doing, and then look at what physics emerges, and then decide the direction.
When we visited CERN, it was a fortnight after Ukraine had been invaded by Russia, and people were upset and more determined than ever of the need to work together. And while we were there, Connie, who gave us a tour, who's the co-editor of the anthology, she and her partner Chris, to whom the book is dedicated, who died suddenly last year. They were arranging aid and driving overnight and going to the Polish border to help the people of Ukraine. And there was really the feeling of this is humanity coming together at its best. You know, the scientists know that they have to work together, and the people are doing what they can. And it was so clear, that sense that this will not happen because this is the best of us.
Okay. Are there any questions? There are some roving mics. One.
Thank you. Hi. So I've noticed that our two most creative panelists here have scientific devices wrapped around their wrist, and our most scientific person doesn't. Who's right?
Wow. I wasn't expecting that as a question.
Try and press it and see.
You can pay for a train ticket. It's really, really good. This one, on the other hand, my son makes me wear to monitor my health. Because he works me out in the garden, and he's got some plan to keep me alive for a while. So he can monitor my health from this one, monitor my heart rate. So who's right? My son, I guess. Do you have an Apple Watch?
No, so I deliberately don't, because if I do, I find I bring my work home too much. You know, physics is a global business. We use email a lot. We use WhatsApp a lot. There's a lot of. So if I do that, my wife to be, just if I stood out, as soon as they're getting a bit restless, would crucify me, I think. So I deliberately don't have one. Mind you, and I was browsing the watches just last week, actually, thinking, could I take a step into that large world? Would it be nice to have a text that just pop up on your phone? I'm not sure it would, actually.
No, I told you I was a 60s hippie, I just got jangling bangles.
Yeah, a question. So about 10 years ago, there was a proposal by Professor Sidney Perkowitz to kind of bring more science into Hollywood, and he proposed this idea of you get one violation of, a fundamental concept of physics or science. And I'm just curious what this panel's kind of thoughts were about that, because it seemed like an interesting idea, but also kind of limiting.
What would you mean that one violation if you get something wrong about science and you're allowed one violation? What happens?
You try to stick to the laws of physics, but you can do like one faster than light. Ships can travel faster than light, or you go back in time, or you do that. Some other thing that's impossible.
Who is this guy with this authoritarian fantasy? What a boring idea. There is a fundamental idea about fiction which is nothing to do with science, it's just about fiction, is you should have only one thing different. You're allowed one big what if, and everything else plays out fine. Now, that's a generally good principle, but it doesn't apply to everything. It doesn't apply to Day of the Triffids. Day of the Triffids, everybody goes blind, and there's a big man-eating point. According to your authoritarian friend, John Wyndham has to be dug up and shot. It's a great story. I think that's a principle of fiction, and I think anyone who makes rules like that is talking out their arse. Nonsense.
We'll cover that one, haven't we?
I'll shut up now.
Was this me? So I just kind of wanted to ask, well, the guy who invented science fiction per se kind of said that science fiction kind of has to be either, 40% action adventure, 30% scientific facts, 20% charming romance, and then 10% actual fake science. Do you think that's do you think people should be moving more towards that way when writing science fiction, or just start to, go away from it and go back?
Those exact percentages. Sounds quite hard. Are we doing it on word count or page count? I don't think so. I don't think that's I don't think being as prescriptive as that would ever work. I think it's the same answer. No, I don't think.
There is historically there's a slight conflict between, I think Jules Verne and H.G. Wells used to sort of bitch about each other a little bit and have a go at each other because H.G. Wells called Jules Verne's stories romances and vessels. H.G. Wells' position is I actually try to model these things out realistically, whereas Jules Verne has a rocket that goes to the moon based on something anti-gravity, etc., etc. And there was a movement a few years ago called the Mundanes. Jeff Ryman and other people tried to reintroduce realistic space travel, which would have to be interplanetary.
And they called themselves, in order to generate massive hit, the mundane.
Good thing.
Hello. Firstly, as a member of both the scientific and creative communities, I just want to say this is an incredibly exciting collaboration, so thank you to all of you for bringing it to life. You mentioned earlier about how accurate you keep the science in stories. Do you think there comes a point where trying to adhere to scientific accuracy can limit the scope of your story, and at what point do you feel you strike that right balance of, yes, this is scientifically accurate enough to be plausible, but it's also fun?
I think that's a fundamental question about writing fiction. Actually, it doesn't have to be science fiction. Quite often, what you get with maybe a new writer is they're writing a piece and it's fictional, and you say this doesn't quite feel true, and they say, but it happened like that, and you think, but that doesn't necessarily lead to fictional truth. If you're writing non-fiction and fiction, you have slightly different. Both of them are stories, of course, but fiction does, the question of can you have one deviation from what we know, maybe, you get maybe one major coincidence. If I'm writing a novel or a short story and I start to have coincidences to make the story work, it starts to fail as a story. And so I think that above all, whatever you're writing, I'm a writer of fiction, and so my work has to work on that level. The story has to work as a story. So that's the primary concern before, does it have to work as science for me?
Hi, over here, thank you. What a beautiful collaboration. We heard authors and creative writers getting inspired by science. Have any of the scientists you met be inspired by your stories, to have a fresh take to their theories, a fresh take to their approach, their methodology? Has it worked the other way?
Funnily, when Joe Haley was trying to work out ways that dark matter could contact us, I said to him, okay, so did you ever have a recurring dream as a child? And his face lit up and he said yes, and it haunted him, and he could still describe the dream exactly as it happened, and he said it happened again and again. And he said actually the dream was set in his childhood home, and he walked down the stairs and there's a bend, and he walked down the rest of the stairs, and in the dream he'd be walking down the stairs, he'd get to the landing, and a hand would shoot out from the coast to grab him, and he'd scream and he'd wake up. And he said this happened again and again and again. And I said, Joe, you're trying to see if dark matter can contact us? Might that be? And I said, can you try, have you ever done any lucid dreaming? Can you try to go to sleep with the intention of having this dream and finding yourself in this dream? And maybe the scream is what wakes your body up. Can you really, really try not to scream? In case the hand is just trying to, shush you through the scream to tell you something. So I'm waiting to hear.
Over the course of this project, there have been many, or the wider series, there have been many examples when scientists have got an idea for a story ready. So one time I sent the writer Adam Marek to work with a scientist who was working on nanofibers and smart clothing and things like this. And the scientist had the story already written out in his head. it was a guy called Dr. Vinod Dana, and he had this idea about the story should be about a soldier who's fallen behind enemy lines and is wounded, and his clothing starts treating him and fixing him and administering medicine and contacting the base and all the rest of it. And he had a very sort of clear understanding or clear idea about where this was going to go technology-wise. And Adam took it in a completely different direction, and he wrote about school kids bullying other school kids from another school because they had smart uniforms, whilst they didn't have smart uniforms. And that's often how technology and society, wider societal kind of interpretations and applications of science works in itself. And there's been lots of examples of that over the series. There's another story about gardening skyscrapers and how you can tweak the DNA of single-cell organisms so they deposit concrete, and then you can grow skyscrapers. It's perfectly reasonable technology, and the writer took it in a different direction and imagined activists or people taking cuttings and stealing it and bootlegging it as a piece of technology. So the writer always takes it in a different direction to where the physicists or scientists had in, or what they had in mind. So it's definitely a two-way kind of conversation in that sense. I think it's time for one last question.
Rob.
Hi.
Oh, time for two questions, right?
Yeah, go on.
How useful are things we don't understand?
How useful are things you don't understand? Really useful, because that tells you where to look. So in science, you know what you understand about the universe. You're also really aware of what you don't know, and that's the exciting bit. You give all these talks, and talk to kids, about all the amazing theories of the universe. Actually, the fun bit, when your research time talking about, is stuff we don't know, which is the bulk of it. You don't understand things about the Higgs boson, you don't understand things about dark matter, you don't understand things about dark energy, and that's the cool thing, that's the fun bit. So that's the driver for you, because you want to, as a scientist, you want to understand all this stuff. Good question. Yeah.
So I love this model where you've paired scientists with authors, and obviously you've created this anthology about CERN. Are there any other areas of science where you're like, oh, I'm really itching to sort of apply this model to that?
So we've done some other books.
Sorry. I'll read it.
It's a great question. I'm all here to show you. No. So we did a fantastic book before this one on thought experiments. So things like Maxwell's demon, things like that, where we use scientific imagination to explore the consequences of theory. So we had that similar kind of format. And again, it worked very well. So I think there's loads of other things we'd like to do with this. We're exploring now, can we do something in North America to reach the market over there, and look at some of the science ideas there. Someone came up to me at an event in London a month ago about graphic novels. Could we create graphic novels with similar kind of approach, or screenplays, or piece of cinema? There's many cool things you can do. When you elevate the scientist and the creative person together in an equal footing, you can then have this interaction that can generate all kinds of fun stuff. So hopefully this is just the beginning. I want to be here next year with a graphic novel about dark matter. How cool would that be?
There is one. Have you read my story?
Oh my god.
Fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we have run out of time. There's a few people I need to thank. I need to thank the Arts Council and LHC UK HL for sponsoring this project, the UKRI and the SFTC, and also a huge thank you to Connie and to Chris Thomas, her partner, who was integral to this process. And as Lucy said, very tragically died. This project is dedicated to him, and it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him. And also to Connie's brilliant organisation. So please join us in bookstore afterwards. But for now, please join me in thanking today's guest.